Though everything is still covered in snow, there has been a slight shifting in the feel of the days. Suddenly, the days are feeling longer, the sun higher and warmer. It won't be long now before things begin to thaw. Though the garden lies still outside, I've been nursing a few houseplants inside and attempting to apply some basic gardening tips to help revive them. One of them is this little potted rose that I found at the grocer's over Christmas. It was fairly happy when I purchased it. However, fairly quickly, I noticed it was no longer doing well. The buds weren't opening, they were simply dying off. The leaves began to wither, and yet it seemed like I was watering it too much, the soil being overly damp. I was at the point of throwing it in the compost when I thought, if this was a rose in my garden, what would it need? I know the roses in my garden like a good amount of sunshine. They require a good amount of water, but need soil that has good drainage. They also like to be deadheaded often to promote new growth. I moved a little antique plant stand I have to the sunniest spot in our home, a bay window we have in our living room that gets sun all afternoon long. For the time being, I just left the plant as it was, not pruning anything. The extra sunlight dried out the soil fairly quickly, so I then began watering it regularly. Within a week, new growth began, and it was clear the little rosebush was happy there. Over the past 3 weeks, it's nearly doubled in size. I've since pruned all of the dead blooms off below the stems with 5 leaves, as I do my other roses, and removed any dead or damaged leaves. It's so much happier, and it's actually started blooming again. I'm at the point where I think I may need to weave some sort of small trellis for support. I don't have many houseplants, but I do always have a few potted ivy around and a couple geraniums, usually kept from summer. They're fairly easy to maintain as they like a good soaking every now and then and can then be left to dry out. Occasionally I do a little deadheading. There's something about the way they look in old terracotta pots that I just love. They remind me of Beatrix Potter illustrations. I always like to collect little antique saucers and plates, just to keep underneath the pots. It helps in case any water spills over, but it adds to the character of them. I also have a small watering can that I use for watering things around the house. This was an anniversary gift from my husband. Cut flowers are also a lovely way to bring a bit of the garden indoors. However, in rural Nova Scotia, my options for fresh florals this time of year is very limited to the selection at our local grocery. Roses are available this month, however, and I wanted to share how easy it is to elevate a simple grocery store bunch to something that feels a little more special. I begin by cutting all the bottoms at an angle, usually underwater, to help open them up and allow them to stay fresh longer, and then I get them in fresh water as soon as possible. Then I remove any dead petals or low stems. Arranging a bouquet takes a little bit of practice, but it's not complicated. I begin with 3 stems crossed over each other in one hand. Then I lay the following stems on an angle, somewhat parallel with my thumb, holding the bouquet, and work my way around, laying the stems over top each other, going in the same direction. This creates a sort of spiral bouquet. Once they're all arranged, I tie the bouquet with basic twine and trim the bottoms to the height I want. If gifting, leave them longer, so whenever the person who is receiving it wants to trim them, they can trim them to whatever vase length they need. Then I overlap 2 squares of brown paper, layered with a few squares of floral tissue. I begin at one end and loosely roll the bouquet up in the paper, gathering the bottom part together as I roll. This gives me a section to tie a pretty ribbon about. It's amazing how much more elevated the roses feel when they're wrapped beautifully. It's the perfect example of how a little time and effort, with little cost, makes something feel so much more special. Isaiah 35 verse 1 says, "The wilderness and the solitary place shall be glad for them, and the desert shall rejoice and blossom as the rose." As I've watched this little rose bush that was dying and withering come back to life and blossom as it's been sat in the sun and watered, even pruned, I can't help but see how this is exactly what it's like when you're close with the Lord. When I stay close to the light, Him, and am well watered with His Word, there is where I thrive. It's where I grow and blossom. Sometimes I might require something to be pruned, but the pruning brings forth more growth. In seasons where I haven't been close to Him, my life feels like this verse, a wilderness and a solitary place. But praise the Lord, there's no wilderness He doesn't rescue us from, or solitary place that's too far from Him. If you're feeling like you're there, draw near to Him. He will bring rejoicing and in time, the blossoming.